Hello, everybody, and welcome to the HTML All the Things podcast, episode number 49, Choosing the Right CMS. I'm your host, Matt Lawrence, and I'm joined again with my co-host, Mike Coran. And once again, Mike is forcing me to do his shameless self-plug saga, so we're going to have to read this again. It's going to take another, 40 minutes, and I really do apologize for this. So if you've been enjoying the podcast so far and you want to support us, there are a couple ways to do that. Review us on Apple Podcasts or the platform that you're listening to this on. You can also check us out on Patreon. So right now we only have 2 tiers, but the $3 tier will give you a shout out on the podcast, and we also share a link to your website in the show notes. And probably the most important one is just to actually share this. Tell your friends or anyone else that's interested in web development or would be interested in listening to us. And we also have a new Discord, with that being said, and you can join that. We have a bunch of developers talking in there, whether they need help or just chatting about off-topic things or on-topic things, whatever they're working on, sharing their projects, etc. So without further ado, we're going to be moving into our weekly pain points. And Mike, take it away.
All right. My weekly pain point saga this week is context switching. Context switching essentially refers to having to go from one thing to another, one project to another, one task to another really quickly. And this last week has been kind of tough because there's just been a lot of projects on the go. And I've had to constantly work half an hour on this, get a call about something else, switch quickly to a completely different project, completely different environment, start working on that. Then in the middle of that, I'll get another call and have to switch to another thing. And it just became kind of a mess. So I had to kind of cut that off, put strict time frames on myself where I'm not even picking up the phone or not picking up any calls until I finish a feature at least, just so I get some productivity, because it takes me a little bit of time to ramp up in each project as I do it, because I have to set up my dev environment for a different, if it's a Vue dev environment, it's different than just a regular website dev environment. If it's an Android dev environment, so et cetera, is just context switching is a pain. I've gotten better at it, but I still suck. What about you, Matt?
So this week is very in line with what we're actually going to be discussing this week, and that is researching a new CMS. Specifically, I was tasked with researching WordPress for about, I don't know, maybe a 12 or 24-hour period, something like that. And we just kind of looked over a few articles, watched a few videos, that type of thing. And then then you and I had a lengthy discussion, which is what we're going to be actually discussing today. We had a lengthy discussion regarding CMSs as well as, our future with them, because one of the CMSs that we use isn't maintained as much as we'd like. So we'd like to sort of get one that's more advanced and maintained more if possible. Now, with that being said, I just want to kind of preface this episode with the fact that this is not a standard episode with sort of lengthy show notes and a bunch of segments or anything like that. We basically just have a list of talking points, really quick bullet points, because Mike and I have actually discussed this 2 to 3 times this week. So we kind of have this fresh in our mind, and we kind of wanted to discuss this because this is sort of an interesting development that I'm sure some of you will come to when it comes to some of your projects. So I'm going to kick it off actually right into the episode here with a couple of our talking points, and I'll just kind of lay out what happened and how did we get here, what's going on. And basically what that is that Mike and I went to go actually work in person, and we were planning on just kind of laying more groundwork for our website. So if you're in our Discord, you know that we've actually mentioned a few times that we're going to do a really big facelift to our website, that the current website that's there is basically a demo, and that we will be, doing a full facelift, a full new idea, a full whatever. And basically we went from that idea, we went to work in person, like I said, and we were just going to expand basically what we have. So we have a DigitalOcean, we have a DigitalOcean spun up. We have everything spun up in vue.js. Everything is just sort of, right there. There's a custom admin panel that isn't styled, that type of thing. Everything's in a demo form. Like I said, everything's in a demo form. And we wanted to kind of, really polish it out, really kind of redesign some stuff because things are too big. Things are kind of laid out weird in some places. So that's basically what our goal was. And what basically ended up happening is for years and years and years, we refused or we didn't want to use WordPress. And we ended up coming out of that conversation with the idea that maybe we would use WordPress, maybe we would use a different CMS like Webflow. I know that when we first spun up the site, I think it was actually an episode where we actually had a discussion about how we wanted to use Webflow, but some of the ideas we had were going to be limited. And that is still true. There's a couple of the features in there. I think it's the availability bar or something I can't remember exactly what it was now, but there's like a feature that's currently on the site that is like a little bit limited in terms of what you can do with Webflow, or at least how I know how to implement it. And as a result, we were always stayed away from them. But then we kind of had a lengthy discussion where right now the website as it sits, so HTML, all the things.com, it just puts out stuff that we've done. So it puts out things that, our podcasts, our blog posts, our articles, whatever we've written, any of our templates or whatever, which is, few and far between at this point. But anything that we've done for HTML, all the things kind of goes up there. And one of the things that we had discussed was that we want to have more content. We want to have it to be an active site. We want it to be a place that people can actually come and read about web development news or what's going on, so that they can kind of get, they can kind of get like the weekly rundown, if you will. And as a result of that, we need to kind of convert the look and convert the feel to more of a tech blog. But we still want this to be sort of a more, I don't really have a better word than say intimate, a sort of more intimate project where it's still very much, this is the podcast. We still have like a friendly developer community that we want people to come out and chat, whether they're, experienced or not. And we still want people to, listen to the podcast, and we still want people to share their work. So we came up with this idea where we were going to have, tech stories from around the web, like whether we read something or whether we saw something or had it shared to us, and we were like, hey, that's a cool article. We're going to share this on the site. We also wanted to have specifically a community spotlight page, not page, well, maybe a page actually. So like we're still kind of working out the details, but a page or like a segment or a section at least on the homepage that kind of showcases some of the community's work, and we'll decide kind of how that shows up and like who gets selected or whatever. We haven't worked that out yet either. So basically we want to have that, and then obviously written articles like what Mike and I have done. And so we want it to kind of be a more active page where, you're kind of coming to the site more than you would if you were just a person that likes to read the show notes, which is, approximately once a week. So we want to ensure that it's a useful site that can be maintained, that is expandable. So if we literally start just writing content like mad, that site is ready to accommodate us, and we want to make sure that it's constantly updated so that it's, well, we had a major discussion about whether it's bookmarkable and what's bookmarkable and what does that mean, and like what would cause someone to bookmark something. And so we want to basically make the site bookmarkable, specifically the homepage. And then, of course, there'll be the other pages, some of the other pages that you've seen before, like the podcast page and that type of thing. Now, because this is all, conceptual, a lot of this stuff is subject to change, of course, is literally changing every day or whatever. But I'm basically in the process of laying out the UI in a wireframing software. We use Balsamic Cloud. That's basically where we are. So to kind of kick off this discussion after that preface is that basically what we want to do is we're still in the midst of deciding whether or not we want to use our own. So we want to use vue.js and kind of make our own admin panel and make our own front end and do the whole thing where we make everything from scratch. So basically we're reinventing the wheel. Or alternatively, we could use WordPress, which is obviously a major CMS in the marketplace. That's obviously one of the most popular, if not the most popular. I think it is the most popular CMS around. So we could use that. Or we could use something that we're also familiar with, like Webflow, or alternatively, which is probably not going to happen, something that we've never used, never heard of before, or something that we've researched, found, and said, yep, this sounds good, let's do it. So this is kind of where we sit. And it's a big crossroads because you might think, well, you're just spinning up a website, but it is a big crossroads because Mike and I have stayed away from WordPress since the beginning. One of our websites was on WordPress. We didn't really have an enjoyable time setting it up because we were new. We were like, okay, let's just dive into actually learning how to like program sites from scratch sort of thing and really kind of like double down on that. However, now we're at this discussion where we're at the crossroads of we want this up relatively quickly, like not to rush it, but we want this up relatively quickly and we want it up. I don't want to sit here and like every little feature having to be something that we have to make rather than click a few buttons to spin up. And then that'll take months and months and months. And then if we get busy with client work, then it's a whole other thing. So we basically want this done is basically it. Is basically the end of the game here, the end of the road. And this is why this discussion came up. And I think this is important, and I'll kind of pass it off to Mike in a second here. But I think this is important to have this discussion to sort of end my section here is because we were also one of those people that were totally against using something pre-made for the most part, slowly started using slowly started using Webflow, and then also we used Couch CMS for simpler sites. And now we're looking at using something that's like super popular that a lot of people use that have like a massive theming engine or template engine like WordPress. So it's like totally different than reinventing the wheel. It's totally different than making your own thing. This is like a completely different offshoot. So I'm going to pass it off to Mike to kind of discuss some more about this.
Yeah, absolutely. So a big thing that I want to point out is like we went into this wanting to build our own, roll our own kind of back end, front end, everything, with the intention of obviously learning a lot, uh, building our own system to make it as flexible as possible, and generating a bunch of content for Hat along the way. There was a lot of reasons why we decided to do it that way. But when we kind of sat down last week and we're talking about it, it comes like it's to the point where right now Matt and I are both fairly busy with client work. So that it was a balancing act. Like I really want to do this like custom CMS, like creating my own essentially a CMS or an API or a headless CMS, and then having a front end role with it. I really want to do that. And we had this like long back and forth about like should we do it, should we not? And it came down to, well, if I do that, then I can't also generate content for Hat. So I can't do my like I've been doing my Vue.js guide, and I'm planning a really big step part 3 to that guide that's actually really interesting, and I'll share some more details about it a little bit later. But essentially that's kind of been my focus for Hat content. I sat down like I have so much on my plate right now with client work that if I were to take on developing an entire front end back end solution for us, and we've already developed like a very basic portion of it, but the features that we want to add are pretty extensive to it. Like making it, feature parity with all the big CMSs out there. Being able to edit, like having multiple people edit at the same time, stuff like that. That would have taken me a considerable amount of time. And as much as I wanted to do it, and I still want to do it, to be honest, I just think like we need something out there, like Matt was saying. So that's kind of where we're at. We just need something that's a little bit more functional, something that shows our vision a little bit more. And the vision that I'm seeing is that as much as as much as news and stuff is really cool and people will come back to look at the news and stuff, my big thing is the community that we're building. And I really, really like the community that we're building. Like if you check out our Discord, if you check out anyone that, people talk to us all the time on Instagram and Twitter and stuff. That's the thing that I'm most interested in with this project, is promoting that community, creating a better cohesive developer community as we go, more learning, more information for them, and just a better environment to learn and get started in than they would have in a different place. And that's where I think the website needs to go. And I think it needs to go there quite quickly to take advantage of our growth. So that's why we're even on this topic. Like, why would he even use WordPress or whatever? So with that being said, I think we're at the point now, Matt, where we're kind of discussing, are we going to go with Webflow, which is, I think the reason for that is it's probably the fastest to get spun up at this point, because Matt has a pretty good understanding of it. There's a lot of different structural things in there that make it a lot easier for us to spin up quickly. Now it has a few disadvantages of cost, and it's a little bit rigid in its limitations. So if there is a limitation, it's 100% like 100%. You can't get around it. It's not like a limitation on a different platform where you can kind of just code yourself around it, with a couple caveats, obviously. But essentially, I think we're in the process of discussing Webflow. Should we go WordPress? Should we go a completely different CMS? And I don't know exactly where we left off with this discussion last week, but I'm kind of wondering where you're leaning towards at this point, Matt.
Well, the thing is, actually, just to sort of even add some information to that, is that one of the things that we had a discussion about WordPress was that we wanted to make it so that I was actually going to not download a theme and not download a template, which kind of sounds counterintuitive. But what we were going to do is we were going to use this as an opportunity to develop my skill at developing in WordPress. Excuse me. So basically what was going to happen was I was going to literally start my own theme, make my own thing. And then like obviously the back end or like the CMS part is basically done with WordPress. And so I was going to literally make my own theme. I was going to do my own UI type of thing, my own layout. And then that's how we were going to handle WordPress. And one of the major things that we discovered, and this will lead right into that conversation or that question answer that Mike said, or Mike asked, was that I don't know what the big deal is about WordPress. Now, maybe I'm naive or whatever it is. Like, there's nothing wrong with WordPress. I'm not ripping on it in any way. But in terms of other CMSs that I've seen, so Webflow is like a big one, even like Couch and stuff like that. What I like to do for my customers, and I realize I'm not one of my customers, but what I like to do with my customers is I like to hold their hand through the filling out procedure of the page. So I don't like to just kind of toss them in with a like a title. So like, essentially, what WordPress is at its most basic core. I know you can add more to it, but just hear me out. At its most basic core, it is primarily title, image, like a featured image, and then a rich text thing where you can type your article in, and you can, add your images, embed stuff, whatever, right? It's a rich text, massive rich text field. Very versatile and whatever. But the issue is that a lot of people, or at least people that we've worked with, like to have a more complex page. They like to have a byline, they like to have this and that and the other thing. And WordPress does support that. There are custom fields and other things like that. But there's a lack natively, right? There's plugins that handle this, but there's a lack natively of other types of controls that I've used very often. Things like toggle switches and little pieces of logic and that type of thing that allow a customer to have their hand held through the editing procedure where they literally go from the top and they fill in the title, then they go down and it literally says like toggle switch. If you toggle this on, all the fields marked with a 1 or whatever will appear on the page. If it says off, all the ones marked with a 1 will not, and all the ones marked with a 2 will appear. Like I'm literally trying to hold their hand so that they can't really make a mistake. And if they make a mistake, the page still looks okay. But it will just have the wrong information, and they can obviously, refresh and fix that. But with WordPress, it just kind of seems like it's more, obviously it's more blog based because, I mean, the actual WordPress.com or whatever it is, like the version that they host themselves is obviously like a blogging platform. But one of the things with WordPress is it seems to have expanded into other website types that aren't just blogs. And I don't really see why. It's absolutely capable of doing it, but it relies really heavily on plugins. Excuse me. So one of the problems is that I don't really want to rely on 1,000,001 plugins. Now, we've had this discussion just this morning, Mike and I have, where obviously if we're using Vue or any type of node thing, there's 1,000,001 dependencies that it depends on that are more invisible than the ones in WordPress. So WordPress literally has a UI where you go in, you add your plugin, unless there's some sort of other installation process that you need for your particular plugin. In general, kind of looking at plugin marketplace, you select your plugin, you add it, you pay for it, whatever the situation may be, and then you use it. And so it's very apparent on WordPress that you're using a plugin. Whereas here, whereas in Node, it's more invisible, so it's less apparent, but you're still getting the same procedure, I guess. Like these are the exact things that we keep getting caught up on. Is like I'll be like, hey, with like these plugins, I don't want to rely on 1,000,001 plugins. Like there's a plugin that's out there for, I think it's called Advanced Custom Functions or something, which is fine. And you can add toggle switches and you can add all this stuff. But then I think to myself, why isn't that natively in WordPress? And that's what bothers me. But then again, when we're using Vue and that type of thing, what am I using? Because I'm mostly doing the UI stuff, but like, what are we using, I guess I should say, in the whole website that isn't native to Vue.js? Probably a bunch. There's probably a bunch of dependencies in there, or maybe it's all native to Vue.js, but Vue.js has a bunch of dependencies in and of itself, which are essentially plugins they're not Vue.js plugins to be clear, but they're essentially the same thing as a WordPress plugin where there's a bunch of dependencies. And so we're coming from a world where, well, ultimately this is the issue. We're coming from a world where we make everything custom, whether or not it relies on some sort of infrastructure. And now we're relying on more of a consumerized experience. And this is our issue with WordPress. I'm not saying don't use WordPress. I'm not saying that. Heck, we're considering using it. But I just think it's strange, personally, that things like Webflow and other CMSs we've used have a bunch of stuff that's very easy to hold the customer's hand through. Logic things, I don't know, date pickers, just stuff like that, right? Other fields than a rich text field or just like a text field. And it's not as easy as that. At least, and again, I'm brand new essentially to trying to actually develop in WordPress. So if I'm wrong, please correct me. But from what I can tell, none of this stuff is native. And every person I've talked to has said you need to use advanced custom functions. And my response is what happens if advanced custom functions stops being supported tomorrow? What happens to all that data? And I'm thinking about it in terms of a customer perspective. If I'm investing all this time in learning WordPress as a skill, and I spin up a WordPress site for a customer, and they have 1,000 or 1,500 articles they write for years, and all of a sudden advanced custom functions shut down. Now what do I say to them? Oh, sorry, all that logic and all those pages we have is now broken. I don't know what to do. Sorry. Like, we're going to have to develop some massive custom solution. It's going to cost you thousands of dollars because this plugin is gone. Now, a lot of people out there are probably saying there's other solutions that may come up, or maybe there are other solutions out there. Fine, but maybe they're not compatible with this. Who knows? And so this is sort of where I think the crossroads, or at least the crossroads for me, where we're super used to everything being custom, or at least we're in the majority of the control, and now we're kind of handing it over. And then to another point to Mike's thing. So I'm rather experienced with Webflow. We have a customer that really enjoys using Webflow, so I've learned it inside and out. Been using it a lot. I really enjoy it. It's, for me anyway, it's rapid firing up things, and it's all CSS. So I don't lose my CSS knowledge by making UIs in there, because I'm literally, instead of typing in display flex, I'm clicking the display flex button. And so you're visually coding. We've gone through this in other episodes. You're visually coding websites on Webflow, at least in my opinion. And what the difference between Webflow and WordPress is that if you think about it, WordPress it's hard to edit, but there's wiggle room there. And when I say that, it's, if you download a template and somebody wants you to make another page for it, it's not the easiest thing in the world to spin up another page, or another like type of page is what I mean, like a big visual change. It's not the biggest, or it's not the easiest thing to do, but generally it's doable. There's wiggle room there. If your WordPress is running poorly and your server does have more power that it could offer, you can, manipulate your PHP and that type of thing to sort of like change those boundaries. In Webflow, a lot of those boundaries are absolute. Sure, you can get around some things with inline JavaScript and that type of thing to like sort of circumvent the Webflow systems. But Webflow is very free to edit your stuff internally. But when you hit a boundary, oftentimes it's a boundary. And one of the boundaries is price, just straight up. But one of the technical boundaries is that you can't have very large PDFs, is a good one, is a good example. You can't really host 1,000,001 files on here. Like, this is not a website. Like, I personally wouldn't want to have a website on Webflow in which I host content for customers to download constantly. Like, if that is the focus of my website, I really wouldn't want to use Webflow for that. I'd probably want a custom, file structure and the whole bit. And you really can't do that in Webflow because you don't have FTP access. You really can't do that in Webflow unless you have some sort of external file system that you're connecting to remotely with an API or something. And then you have to do that with inline JavaScript, because you don't have access to upload a JS script because you're using their system. You're in the WordPress world, or the Webflow world. You are literally in a walled garden of web development, and it's fast. Like, you can do a lot of stuff. There's a lot of things that like we figured out how to do where I didn't think it was going to be possible with the Webflow system, like CMS and that. But as I got better, I can do this. I can do this logic and flip these switches and have the customer flip this, so it'll actually change the whole page up and that type of thing. I can absolutely do that. But when you hit those limitations, like if I need to upload a massive PDF, nope, that's it. Too bad, not happening. And it's expensive. And on top of that, it's not like standard hosting. It's not standard hosting in which Webflow only hosts the website. It doesn't host anything else. It doesn't host email. There's no webmail there. It doesn't host. It doesn't really host. Well, it hosts databases, like relevant databases that for your CMS and that type of thing. But it doesn't host databases in general. Like, if you just need generic databases installed for whatever reason, you just have like a fixed database you do reference for some reason, you can't do that. There's no DNS. DNS points to Webflow. You set 2A records in a CNAME. You do not do anything else with Webflow. It does not handle DNS. It does not handle anything like that. It does not handle, or you can't really handle the database stuff too much. You can't really do a lot of that stuff. And a lot of the stuff is a fair bit of the more advanced features. So, for example, the full API for the CMS is hidden behind a paywall in which you have to go up a tier. If you want more information put into your CMSs per pages, because there's a limit on how many fields, I believe it's 30. I believe it's 30. I don't remember. But if you're getting into like super complex pages, you're limited there and you have to upgrade your hosting. But I haven't confirmed this, but I'm sure, or I shouldn't say I'm sure because I haven't confirmed it, but I would assume that there is another limit, even if you upgrade your hosting past, let's hypothetically say it is 30. If it's 30 fields, you need to go above it, you upgrade your hosting, and I assume, again, I'm assuming that there's another limit. That's probably a hard limit. And so it's like, well, you hit 100, that's it, too bad. And it's like, well, I need 105. No, 100. That's it. With WordPress, maybe there's a limit like that, but you generally can kind of hack into it and kind of, force it to do another 5, right? Force it to do 105 fields rather than just 100. That type of thing. That's sort of where you're at with WordPress, where you can kind of massage it to do what you want. Whereas Webflow is like, no, this is how it is. Please use external resources somehow if you want to do things externally. So with that being said, I'll kind of pass it off to Mike for his comments based on that long-winded explanation.
Yeah. Okay. So it sounds like although Webflow would be great for getting something up really quickly, in the future it might be limiting to us in a few different ways. Like let's say we wanted to host a bunch of PDF files, like we have PDF guides, and they're above 10 megabytes. We have to do our own hosting solution and then link it up to Webflow. And that sounds kind of counterintuitive to what we want to accomplish. I mean, it's doable, but it sounds counterintuitive. And then on the other side, WordPress, first of all, it seems like a pretty long learning curve especially for us. Like I went in and looked at it as well, and I looked at the templating, like how they handle templating with their PHP coding and stuff like that. And I know PHP pretty bad. Like I'm fairly bad with PHP, but I've used it here and there. For me, it was a little bit like, I don't want to say it was way over my head, but like just looking at it quickly, it wasn't clear to me what was like how to structure a website. You know what I mean? Like, and I'm talking like how to like lay it out as in HTML and CSS. That to me wasn't clear, and that kind of threw me off of it. Now, having said that, I want to throw a little bit of a wrench in the WordPress game. They have a fully accessible JSON API. And what that means is that anything that you do on the back end, so any set of collections you make, any set of posts you make, that is fully accessible through an API, and therefore fully integratable into any website that you make. So even if you make your own custom, just JS, HTML, CSS website with no frameworks, all you would have to do is do an AJAX request to the WordPress backend, and it would give you all the posts that you would need to display on your page and stuff like that. And that's free. That's not a plugin. That's built in to WordPress, and apparently it's built into WordPress for a long time. And that's why I think it's one of the biggest, like more used frameworks out there, because think about it. You have a client that's already familiar with WordPress, that's been using it for years. Not only like now you can create a completely custom solution for them on the front end, not using any frameworks or using the framework that you like maybe you like React, maybe you like Vue. Their backend stays the same. Their backend is now separated from the front end. So that gives, and I got some of this information from the Syntax podcast that was recently released on headless CMSs. I highly recommend people listen to that. It's like 20 minutes long. It's a quick like discussion on what a headless CMS is, and they discuss this in a little bit more detail than I will. So shout out to a Syntax podcast on that. Check it out. But essentially, what it allows you to do again is to tie in any sort of front end to the back end, and the huge benefits of that is obviously you're using the skills that you already know. The only thing that you need to know how to do is essentially manipulate JSON, because on the back end you're just creating data with the built-in whatever plugins you use or whatever built-in information, like whatever built-in structuring that they have, so blog posts and stuff like that, and then that fully exposes that JSON to you. On the front end, you need to know how to manipulate JSON. That's fair, but other than that, you're just creating web pages based on the JSON that's being sent to you. And when someone goes in there, and one big thing I have with WordPress is that the security vulnerabilities are pretty high. And how people know that that you have a WordPress site is they usually go into your front end, and if they see all this templating syntax PHP code in there, they know that you have WordPress, and they start attacking you. But with this solution, they would never know that you have WordPress because you're essentially just contacting a backend API.
Right.
So it's kind of a huge that security is now no longer an issue. So it's a triple, like I don't know, it's a pretty big edged sword. It's doable, especially for client work. I don't know if it's something that we would use for our site. It's possible if you want to take it on or not, but that's kind of the wrench that I'm going to throw into WordPress. The other thing that I wanted to talk about quickly and pass it off to you, Matt, is October CMS. So we looked into October CMS for doing a client site recently. And the limitation of October, and this was kind of shocking to me, is the fact that they don't have that hand holding that Matt was talking about. And I mean at all, pretty much. So when you're going into edit your site, you're editing markup, and markup as in like div tags and h1 tags and stuff like that. Like, so like when you're going into the backend CMS, you're literally editing your site like structure wise. And they don't have an option to edit like certain fields and only those fields. As far as I can tell, like I looked at it for a little while, like I'm fairly certain that unless you have some sort of really, really custom plugin, and I couldn't find any off the bat, you can't do that. The only thing that I did find was there's a blog post plugin where it'll actually do rich text fields and stuff like that, but that's like, only blog posts, so not structure of pages. So if you want to edit the About Us section, you literally have to tell your client, okay, go into here, go into the markup. So find the text that you want to edit in the markup. So between the div tags, and then edit it. And in my opinion, that is a ludicrous thing to do, to ask your client to do, because we have clients that have trouble editing text fields. If we're going to tell them to edit inside of a massive text editor that has a bunch of different markup and try to find their text, there's 100% chance that they're going to delete the wrong structure, and their site's going to just be jank. I don't see any way of you can use that. But the thing that I want to point out is that it is kind of interesting for developers, because it's almost like an inline editor for you. So you don't have to spin up, like once you have your site already, you don't have to spin up, your development environment and have to edit a bunch of things. You edit right inside of the October, the live CMS that's in the, like, on your server. So it's a quick way to edit things here and there, and it is very customizable. Plus it uses JS syntax. Like, it seems to me that it might be an option for us, Matt. That's why I kind of want to bring it up. And I don't know what we want to do with this, but I believe that there's a couple of advantages. Is that, yes, it does. We don't have to learn PHP from scratch, like I said we would, like we would have to do for probably WordPress templating. And I believe it does run on PHP in the backend, so we could host it on a regular host as well. So that's kind of what I want to throw off to you.
It's one of those things where we've had this discussion too, where like a lot of the time we want to do a website, or we want to do a new thing, whatever it is, a new skill, learning a new skill, in order to complement what we're doing for business model. And that was one of the big hesitations that we had, and I still have with October, is that there is still going to be a learning curve where I have to spin it up, get it to work, right? And then I'm probably going to try to do some quality of life improvements where I hold even our hands for a bit, because it's really super convenient to type in, the title, tab, type in this, tab, and you're going to get super fast at editing the site. And that's sort of what we want, right? As a site is supposed to complement the fact that we do client work. So it needs to be quick. And yeah, I totally agree with October, though, in terms of I almost call it a developer CMS, where, yeah, there's a bunch of plugins and stuff like that, and it can absolutely be used for customers. There's no doubt there. But if you're using markup, like their intro video, like I haven't really looked at their plugins and that type of thing, but their intro video shows them editing markup, and it, like, just making a DOM, essentially. They're just making an HTML file. And it's like, what are you guys doing? Like, this, like, customers aren't going to be able to do this, because customers need me to train them on my hand holding method. Now, I'm not calling them dumb or anything like that. That's literally what is supposed to be happening. We're the technical experts. They hired us to help them. I made the tech easy to understand, then I trained them how to use it, and now they're able to go off and do it. Could you imagine how much training it would be for that? You're literally training them They were using unordered lists and ordered lists. I saw them in the intro video. Customers aren't going to remember OL and LI and how to open and close stuff. They're not going to remember that. And you could say, well, oh, well, markup's really easy. Yeah, fantastic. You're probably a developer. Sit down. A customer doesn't understand that because he's too busy selling cars or whatever he does. You know, they're not supposed to be learning that stuff. For us, it's fine, but it's just weird that like I don't understand how we can't have like right now, and we haven't looked a lot at third-party solutions, but like why a massive standard hasn't come out where people are holding their customers' hands through editing software. Like if WordPress literally had a whole bunch of like editable fields and all this crap that was like native, I could use toggles, use all this, I would probably have just jumped right in there and started figuring it out. Because I found a video, like you were saying, you were having trouble laying out, figuring out what goes where. This guy literally starts. He goes, "All right, here's an empty folder. This is what we got to do. You got to create a header or this or that, a footer or whatever." And then he starts breaking it up. And then he'll make common mistakes intentionally. Be like, "Okay, see how we did this? Yeah. Well, now we do this in regular HTML, but we actually want to cut this out and move it over to this file because WordPress looks here and scans it like this. So this is why we do it like so. Like that is where I would follow. Where I would literally start that video over and be like, "Okay, I need to make this and make this and make this." And I would literally probably make his little like test template, and then I would go from there. The thing with WordPress though is that you're talking in almost another language. WordPress is very WordPress, if that makes sense. One of the things that we had a discussion was I can absolutely learn it. I know very little PHP. I literally know enough PHP to fight the odd couch CMS thing that I encounter, or WordPress in the past. That's how much PHP I know. I don't use it. I know like HTML, CSS, and JS, and Mike knows JS way better than me. And so it's one of those things where I can learn PHP. I know how to understand programming as a general concept. I can learn PHP. That's not a problem. But now we're talking about, just learn PHP. Like just learn PHP. Learn the WordPress language. Learn all the API. Learn WordPress. And I mean, like learn WordPress. Like make themes. Don't use a theme. Don't use a template. You make themes. Make the templates. And so with that, it's like I told Mike, I'm gonna lose all my other information in my head. Like I'm gonna lose my skill rather. I'm not gonna really remember much about Webflow. I'm gonna remember it a bit, and I'll have to have a big refresher. But right now, it's super fresh in my mind. I use it all the time for customers, and so it's one of those things where, is it worth losing all of that? Couch is really, really, I would say, suited for more simple sites, not like massive websites. In my opinion, and so as a result, I would lose my Couch CMS stuff. And Couch is something we would definitely use for somebody who just wants like a business card website. Couch is perfect. Your standard website where your standard kind of 5-pager business website with a slider and a couple of things. Yeah, that's all Couch territory, man. That's what you should be using. And Couch is a very simple CMS that allows the hand holding. And I keep coming back to that because I think from a UX perspective that's required. And even for me, like we have in our our unstyled admin panel in our current vue.js website, like HTML, all the things right now has an unstyled admin panel for Mike and I to edit. That thing has hand holding. I literally check boxes for what goes in the availability bar. Some stuff's filled in automatically. Some stuff isn't. There's a place where I paste the embed code. What I don't want is for me to have to make a big file where I tell customers, okay, always copy and paste this into the rich text field or something, right? That's what I'm worried about. And I know what a bunch of WordPress devs are probably thinking when they hear this is that just use templates. Like, what are you doing? Yeah, absolutely. But coming back to that original skill thing that I mentioned is one of the things that we mentioned is like, I'd like to learn, if I want to learn the skill, I want to learn the skill and then use it. And so now I've become a WordPress dev, and now I'm solely doing WordPress for everybody. And that's like a big difference. Like that's a big change. There's nothing wrong with that, but that's a big change from our original vision, our original thing where we were trying to make everything from scratch, right? Like this is a big difference. Even Webflow was a big difference for us, really. What we like, that was a big jump. That took us, what, Mike, a month or something? We like researched it and everything else. We went through it with a customer, and he was like, I like this feature set, let's go, kind of thing.
Yeah.
I think that was a month or at least 2 weeks of, kind of going back and forth just with general, kind of communication. And so this is a big step for us. And I don't know where we sit exactly. because
Yeah.
I think because you were saying one of the big things actually, kind of throw a wrench in it. I don't know if throwing a wrench at each other is the right way to like pass the conversation. Like I'm gonna throw a wrench at you, Mike. Just clang. Like
Yeah.
you could dodge a wrench, you could dodge a ball. But anyway, um, so I'm gonna like bring up another point then, I guess, to be more formal. About WordPress is one of the things that we discussed was you were saying it's probably pretty easy to get WordPress clients, like people who want to use WordPress, people who do whatever. I have a there's a weird thing where a lot of our clients would not be able to or would not want to use WordPress. And the reason why that is for some reason, I don't know what it is. A bunch of companies out there, they use templates and they use WordPress and that's how they do their thing. They use Squarespace, some of them do, like whatever. I don't care. Go ahead. That's fine. Not saying anything against you. Half our clients want these like ridiculous custom pages where it's like, I don't know how to do that in WordPress. Like, I don't know how to I can't download a template and then tack that on. That's a massive difference. They want like some crazy page that like pulls data in and I don't know, does all this stuff. And it's like, dude, literally it's going to take me like an hour custom with a whole bunch of custom code. It's going to take me forever to figure out how to get that thing to work in WordPress. Now, whether that's due to our own ignorance of WordPress, sure. But there's that learning curve again. What do I do? Do we spend all this time learning this skill and then that delays the site again? The site's going to be delayed because I'm going to have to sit there and learn WordPress and I don't want to use, I think we've decided, like I've already started designing like I said, a layout and all that for the new hat site. So it's like, I'm pretty sure we're not going to want to use a template. With Webflow, we didn't want to use a template. With Webflow, you can use templates in Webflow, but we didn't want to use templates in Webflow. We want to make our own thing from scratch. So as a result of that, now what are we looking at? So this actually brings up something that I wanted to mention that I didn't mention because I like kind of discovered this or kind of was thinking about this after we had our conversation in person, Mike. So I'll kind of throw this in there too. Is I wonder if all of these concerns and whatever the heck we're bringing up to the table right now are actually stemmed from the fact that we don't make templates for a living and we don't use them for a living either. And what I mean by that is with a template, you have to think in a very different way. You have to think in, and I'm going to try to, if we use Webflow, I'm actually going to try to do this, is you have to think in a very different way in that you have divs that can be reused all over the place, not just on the page. Maybe it's used 100 times on one page, whatever, but reused across a whole bunch of stuff that have properties that are going to affect a bunch of things. A prime example is a main content wrapper that always squeezes to 50% or something like that and always decides to stack on top of one another when it gets to a certain screen size. Like that's a major, that's a very simple but yet a major system in terms of responsivity, right? Big div that's across the whole screen, or maybe there's a sidebar there and then the sidebar eventually pops underneath it when the screen gets too small and then goes full width. That's a big thing. When you're doing a template, you have to kind of think about that a little bit differently because you want to name it generically. You don't want to call it the home sidebar. You're going to want to call it I don't know, 20 sidebar 20, which is 20% the width or whatever. And you want to have very generic systems that all the pages can fit into. And then you're trying to create more rigid things, right? You're trying to create divs that you can reuse on multiple pages so that people can just copy and paste them. Like in Webflow, one of the big things of Webflow is that literally the template is here's the template. Like it's basically like you've copied the person's HTML and CSS, and it's really here you go. Here's your template. Go ahead and literally change anything you want. Enjoy, and that's it. That's Webflow's template. That's one of the big benefits is because I can just go in there and start ripping it to shreds immediately. I can just go in there and delete it, and then just I've bought it for no reason, or I think some are free, and then just so that. Just to kind of bring it back to the point is, I think when people are working with and making templates, when they're in the template realm, they're thinking in a more generic way because they want to reuse assets, and they want to reuse those assets and they want to reuse those codes because a thing like a standard blog should be reused. You're not going to make a video page. Let's say you have a video page, a video type of post, and then a blog type of post. Blog has a bunch of writing, it has other things like media, so it has pictures and maybe a couple embedded videos. But then let's say this website is video heavy, so you also have a different type of post, which is called videos. Your video post is going to have the same title, the same byline, the same author, the same share bar, the same everything, but it's going to have to be optimized only and solely for video thing. So they're going to try to reuse as much of that code from before. We do the same thing. You should do it being efficient. But I think that the generation process is thought of more when you're doing templates. I think that's why you and I actually struggled with making templates. Because a lot of the time I'll start putting things together and I'm like, shit, people aren't going to understand what this class name is. Like, I got to redo this. Like, it's a different mindset. It's the same code. We know how to do it. We could do it today. We could start right now and start making a template. But we would have to go in and like refactor stuff and be like, okay, customers, which are probably developers, are going to actually see this code generally. If it's a standard HTML CSS template, they're going to see this code. We got to clean this up because even though it's efficient and it runs fine, we have to make sure this is, human readable. People understand what's going on. We don't have duplicate divs where we have two divs with exactly the same properties because that's inefficient. Like, I think it's a different experience. I don't know. I'll kind of toss that to you, Mike. Is whether you think that's, I'll kind of pose a question. Do you think that that's kind of one of the big problems we're having with WordPress is that it's a part of this template community, if you will. There's nothing wrong with that, but we're just so far away from it, and it's such a different way of thinking. Whereas Webflow, the reason why we're okay with Webflow is because setting up a PHP, thing where you constantly have to fill in the blanks, like literally having a form where you have to fill in the blanks, have toggle switches, the whole bit, is kind of a pain. But we want to have control over that front end at least. And with Webflow, you kind of do, or it's the closest you can get anyway.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll answer your question. So I don't know. Like I've created, I think one or two maybe two templates with what you're saying in mind. With like I know that a developer is going to be seeing this code, so it has to be human readable. It has to be extensible. It has to work. Like you have to be able to take this div, put it somewhere else, and within the bound, like you create the bounds, right? Like you say, like these are reusable components that you can use on any page. These are the things that you can't, like these are like if you don't mention it, you can't use that on any page without having to adjust it. So with that in mind, that's how I usually that's how I created those templates. I don't know if I did a great job at it. I think someone recently actually on our Discord took one of our templates and started using it. And so I would like to know actually how that whole experience went, because that'll give really good feedback on if I was, forefront enough or if I thought forward enough to make it readable and usable by a developer. But I agree with you that it's a completely different mindset when you're coding like for a client or something for yourself or for other developers to use. I don't know if that's the right way to do it though, to be honest, because I think like, yes, you shouldn't be always in like the full template mindset, but there should be a hybrid. So you should be always coding in a sense that you yourself will have to look back on it in 5 years and understand everything. And not only that, maybe if we bring on another person, they have to be able to come back and look back on it and understand it. So I think that's where we all have to be coding in that mindset. It's very difficult to do that all the time. And I fully understand like time constraints are very like I don't do it all the time. I'm trying to be better at it because I'm working in more of a team environment. So I have to make sure that people can read my code. But even I get caught up with like leaving comments in where they shouldn't be in, commenting out sections and leaving them there for a little while and then having to go back and refactor it at a later date. Really, you shouldn't be doing that. If you're ever checking in your code and you know that someone might be reading that check-in, that commit, there shouldn't be, random commented out sections. There shouldn't be variables that are named A and B and C that have no information about the actual thing. Like everything should have everything should be readable and understandable either through a comment that you've added to it or through the actual code that you're writing. That's how you should be coding. That's not exactly how everyone codes all the time because it's very tough to do on a time constraint and stuff like that. And I've been trying to fix that, but I don't think anyone's ever going to be 100% amazing at that. That's for sure. Now, with that being said, I want to throw something back at you, throw a point back at you. So I mentioned the headless CMS route with the WordPress or really anything in the back end. Let's say like any sort of back end and then doing just regular, like this is for our site, just to be clear, for the HTML thing site, doing everything in regular vanilla JavaScript like HTML, CSS, JS. So you literally lay it out however you want with the skills that you have now. And use any backend that we find to generate the content. And like how I see this working, and this is again us, Matt and I talking about what we're actually might be doing, is maybe you do a a dummy layout with like dummy content, and then you and I together go look at a backend and see how we can create that content in a backend, and then I'll help you with the JSON manipulation for like calling the site, getting the content, and generating it on the front end. You know what I mean? Like it's not very difficult to do that. It's literally just an AJAX request, is what I'm saying, and then manipulating JSON. Do you have any questions about that? Do you have any like? Does that make sense to you, or do you think that that's like what are your thoughts on the headless route? Like, do you understand how that would work?
You know what? I should be blatantly honest with you. The first thing that popped in my mind when you started mentioning this is it kind of sounds like we should make our own CMS, and like that's a whole other discussion. It kind of sounds like we have our own ideas and our own ways to like try to put this together. Because if we're trying to do like and like I'm naive in this.
Yeah, no, but that's what I'm trying to get at. It's like you're not the only one that's going to be asking these questions.
Would something Couch is not going to be Couch CMS is not headless.
No.
It's not headless. I'm trying to like imagine what you mean by headless.
Okay, so a headless is literally you writing just like it's two separate projects essentially.
So it's that WordPress JSON thing.
Exactly.
That's literally that's headless right there.
That's completely headless. So
I'm getting caught up on the fact that you're using WordPress. I think that's what I'm getting.
So WordPress, headless WordPress is just generating JSON APIs. WordPress has that built in. Yeah. That's headless.
Okay, so like essentially, I'm just gonna give an example. Yep. Essentially, if you were making an app, okay, and you used Webflow, I understand Webflow is not headless, but Webflow has an API for their CMS. Essentially, that's like a headless relationship.
Yes.
Because you're writing in your blog or whatever, and then you want to pull in just your featured articles into your featured app. I don't know why you do that, but let's hypothetically. You're not actually typing that information into the app. The app is pulling it from the CMS API from Webflow.
You got it.
Is that considered headless?
That is exactly what headless is used for. So headless is not only used for creating a site, like that's the advantage of it, right? So that if you create a native application, you can also hit those APIs and get that same information and then lay it out however you want.
Okay.
So that's exactly what I'm saying for our site. So we use something for the headless. It can even be Webflow. You're comfortable with Webflow, just the CMS portion.
Right. Well,
and then you create a completely custom JavaScript, CSS, JS front-end solution for it.
Yeah, I suppose you could do it with Webflow because
why not?
You could buy you'd have to buy the hosting. But you could buy the hosting, and this is all hypothetical because I haven't tested this, but like you could, in my head, you could buy the CMS hosting. You could type all your information. You can make your CMS, right? Make it all, like you make the fields and all that, do the helper text, all the labels, whatever. You make all that. And then having not seen the API myself, I assume it's relatively easy to pull that information. Yes. So you have the CMS with the toggles and everything else, control what's, quote unquote being displayed. And then based on all that logic, we would just read it remotely. You would read all that information and then pull it in. That's interesting. Yeah. I mean, it's expensive. That's expensive with Webflow because you're hosting the CMS.
Yeah.
It's going to be like $20 a month, I think. Plus the fact
Webflow might not be the best way to go regardless because you'll still have the same limitations as we had before with like the PDFs and the amount of fields and stuff like that.
Sure.
But essentially anything like even a WordPress or there's many other headless CMSs. All we'd have to do is manipulate it enough to be able to just like essentially store and then send out our data, the data that we need, which is essentially just blog posts for the most part.
Right.
That's all we would really need. Just the different collections of blog posts with a bunch of different information in it. So, and toggles and stuff like that, depending on what we ask for.
It's kind of sad. All this makes it sound like there's a huge hole in the CMS market.
Why?
It's just, I don't know whether I'm totally off base, but it just sounds to me like this is almost the same sort of discussion in terms of like, this is almost the same sort of discussion we had before making this podcast. Is like we wanted something that was more developer friendly, like syntax is developer friendly, but like they talk more at an advanced level, and we wanted to just sort of have discussions like this where I'm like, what the heck is a headless thing? What do you I don't know, I don't really touch that every day, so I don't know. And we want to just like have those discussions, and like that doesn't really happen on syntax because they're talking about more advanced things, and like this almost seems like the same sort of discussion. Obviously, it's about templates, but the same type of discussion. It's in the same realm as when we were like, well, it seems like there's a hole in the podcast market for people that talk like we're doing right now. It almost sounds like there's a hole in the CMS market where why isn't somebody making this easier? Like, why are we doing this headless thing when we could just make a CMS work really easily? Like, it sounds like it's totally possible. Like, you could do that headless thing, like the headless idea, right? Use the CMS that you want or whatever. Why don't you just make a good CMS in the freaking like just do it right away? Like, just do it right there.
I don't know. Like it's
You know what I'm
there.
trying to say? Like,
I kind of do, but like there's a lot of the issue is that we've looked at a very small portion of CSSs that are out there. There's like hundreds and thousands even.
yes, yeah, of course,
So there
yes.
might be some that like really fit our bill, right? Like we just haven't invested all like I mean it would we'd be investing all our time in looking for a CMS and then testing it out and like figuring it out. That's I think where the issue is. I don't think that there's a need for another amazing CMS out there, to be honest, because and this ties into the headless thing is because headless is becoming such a big thing, and
Right.
it makes so much sense on a couple different levels. Is because like I was trying to there was someone on a Discord, him and I were having a discussion about what he should start learning to do full stack development, right? And to do like, and I was thinking like, okay, let's full stack development. So maybe like Node.js, MongoDB, Express, and then use like handlebars as the templating engine and stuff like that. Everything built into Node.js, but that really limits you with what you can do and how you structure your content and stuff like that. Whereas if you learn how to instead do like, full stack development, learn how to create an API, which is essentially a headless CMS, right? And all an API means is that you're hitting an endpoint and it's sending back information. If you learn how to create that API, then you can use just regular vanilla JavaScript without any dependencies, nothing on your front end and create anything you want. And then in the future, if you want to create an app, you can create an app. In the future, if you want to create a Vue.js front end, you can do that. But your backend stays the same and it's still providing the same exact information. You never have to update it. Whereas if you wanted to go from like a completely new, like if you wanted to go to a different backend, then you have to migrate all that information and stuff like that, and then change your front end as well because it's using a templating front end. You know what I mean? Like if you're changing CMSs on a whole without headless, it's a pain in the ass to go from one to the other. Whereas if you keep them separate, one can be changed without the other having to change that much. And then that provides extensibility, it provides security. Like I said, no one knows which backend you're using. So therefore they can't do a targeted attack on your backend. That's
Right.
how so it's just like to me, the headless CMS route is the one that's replacing all the other routes because it's almost I don't know. It's tough to see a point other than speed. Like if you buy a template, it's tough to see a point in doing the other route anymore because it's the maintainability aspect of it doesn't make sense anymore. Like I said, like you can spin up sites really quickly in just JavaScript, CSS, and JS as far as HTML, like HTML and CSS. Like you
Yeah.
can just go in like with whatever layout you have, go in regular web server, just spin up like a layout of that. That is a fairly quick thing for you to do with
We just
dummy.
did it. We did it in 2 days for one customer. Just like,
That's
oh,
what I
you
mean.
want this? Okay, here you go.
So speed wise, it's good. Yes, we have to tie in an API with a CMS at the back end, and we have to majigger the CMS to be able to pump out the content that we want to pump out. But I think, let's say you create this great dummy looking website in the front end, that will I think that's a good first step because then we'll know exactly what information we need the back end to send it. Because you create those posts, you create each page, and
Yeah, yeah.
we'll be like, okay, well, this page will definitely need a title tag, these toggles to be able to work, stuff like that. Like as soon as you create that front end, we can start looking at a back end. We can even create our own JSON and then create a structure in the back end to create that JSON. It's not very hard to do that. It's hard to do both at the same time, like
Right.
making a front end using a new templating language that you don't know, like October or whatever. That's more difficult. That's a harder spin up. But if you can just create that front end separately from the back end, and then we'll integrate it with the CMS, the headless CMS, I think that's the fast route. You know what I mean? Like that's the first of all, you're using this goes with your point of not using any dependencies. on the
Right.
front end, right? Like, so you can create whatever modules you want, you can create whatever content you want on the front end, and then the back end, like, it becomes just separate, like completely, standalone thing that we can test, try out, maybe move to a different one if we don't want to at some point without having to do anything on the front end. So I don't know, like, I don't think I'm not going to ask you to answer in this conversation if you want to do that,
Right. Right. Right.
because like I think you need to kind of look at it yourself. But if you have any questions, I think it's good to ask them now so that people can hear the answers about it. But I think as this is going, we need to kind of I think we're gonna skip web news for this episode because this is kind of a web news. This entire segment is a web news.
Yeah, because I was about to say, like, I mean, you're on a bit of a time crunch right now,
Yeah.
because you have to get to a meeting. But like, I mean, at the end of the day, this has been all discussion, all
Yeah.
conversation. So yeah, I agree. Because one of the things I was going to actually mention is that when I was researching CMSs, I did find a couple that were, $30 a month, $20 a month, something like that. I can't remember the name of them, but it was because they host the information there. And I didn't really understand. I was like, well, I understood. Like, I understand the fact that you can pull information remotely, obviously. But like, I was just sort of like, why the heck would you do that? But like, now that it's been explained, what's interesting to me is that there isn't that necessary attachment, if you will. Like, there is an attachment, or like there can be like we were always designing it with the fact that like WordPress and its templating engine or its theming engine, whatever you want to call it, downloading templates and installing them is very much attached. And
Yep.
so that's sort of like the standard. And WordPress is older, right? I mean, it's up to date, but it's older. It was invented a long time ago, and so a long time ago in terms of tech. So anyway, like it is very much the older way to do things. Whereas this sort of makes a lot more sense because if I'm not saying we want to make an app, but like you could make an
Yeah.
app. You could make a podcast app. If we wanted to just have a podcast app for whatever reason, you could do that. You could just filter by the podcast type posts, and there would just be like a flag in the CMS and whatever. Like, I mean, we would have to find a CMS that we like where it has the toggles, it has all that, because I do want the handhold even for us, even though we understand what's going on. As we've found out, and we've mentioned this on the show, that when your UX is bad just because you're the one using it, you actually won't want to use it that much. You can absolutely sacrifice some stuff, like like I said, our admin panel is not styled, so it doesn't look great, but it interacts the same way as anything else. We have those handholding things. Check these off. Select this in a drop down. Open this title, like it's labeled and everything. Fine. It just doesn't look amazing. So we sacrificed that, right? A customer would be like, "What the hell is this?" But in terms of actually having bad, like imagine if our availability bar was just us like constantly like copying and pasting like a piece of code.
Yeah, that
Like
would be terrible.
one of the things
Doable, but
doable,
terrible.
absolutely doable. Well, one of the things that we constantly forget is, how like we always have that you can find us on, and then we like list all the social medias and stuff like that. I often forget that because it's a copy paste. It's not something that's just tagged on. I mean, it always needs to be there, but yet it's never just tagged on. And like that's a UX problem.
Yep.
And like it's not the fact that I'm being like lazy. I always forget it. Now imagine that times like 100, where you've made a bunch of sacrifices in other areas.
Mm-hmm.
Now your UX is so bad that you're just like, man, I don't want to use this. This is a nightmare. So like this headless thing is an interesting development.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing I keep getting caught up on, is not the technology, is it's the fact that it's like so many other web devs use WordPress. What are we doing? Like should we be doing that?
Well,
Are we leaving a ton of money on the table? Like that is where I get my this is like, just straight up business thought, if you will, capitalist thought. Are we leaving money on the table? It's just nothing wrong with someone approaching us and being like, I have a WordPress blog and I want to redo it. Can we do that?
So
we can, but
yeah, we absolutely can.
And we would.
Yeah. The thing with, okay, so we were mentioning the fact that WordPress is so common, like it's so popular because it's so common, and it was like it's the biggest one and everyone knows how to use it. So the client is already familiar. Usually, if they're asking for a WordPress site, that means they're usually familiar with a WordPress site. Now, I did mention a thing where WordPress is kind of like Kleenex is to napkins, where people don't know what they're at. Like if they ask for a WordPress site, all they're really meaning is that I want a site that I can edit myself.
Yeah.
Right? Like you can give them a different site and I'm going to say most of them won't know the difference because they can edit it themselves. It looks kind of the same. It doesn't matter. But let's say that someone really wants a WordPress site, or they have a lot of information in their WordPress already done.
Yeah.
Okay. The great thing is that every WordPress has a API built in. Let's say they already have a blog website, they already have a master website, and we're like, okay, well, you want a better one? We create our own front end and just use their APIs. They don't even have to change all their information.
Right.
So that's, again, another benefit of a headless CMS. That's another benefit of WordPress now, is that no one has to, like, a new client comes up to us and they're like, yes, I have a I have a bake shop and I have like a bunch of recipes on a site that I have. And I've been using WordPress for 10 years and it's just running really slow. It's not working very well and stuff like that. But I have a lot of information there. I need to have a new site. Like I need a new site. Now we could go in there and start manipulating their template and try to optimize a few things, or we could literally create our own new site on whatever front end that we want, whether it be vanilla JS or whatever, and just tie it to the thing that they already have through the API. They don't have to re-enter any new information. We already have all the content. We don't have to data entry anything. That saves them money, saves us time. That's why I think WordPress is still very relevant, is because they thought of this a long time ago. Like this is something that's been in WordPress as far as I know for years and years and years. The API. We're learning about it now because now it's becoming really popular to have a headless CMS. But it makes sense now because the JSON parsing technologies are catching up, and it's really easy to go through JSON and create your own thing with just JSON, and that's what WordPress gives you. So, in my eyes, do I see a value in learning WordPress? Yes, but I think where we're at, like we've had this discussion last week, where we're at, we should be sticking to our guns, where we know how to make a website really well and really efficiently with good security and et cetera, for a decent price. We decided to go away from WordPress for a reason, but I think this new headless route, like if a customer were to come to us and said that we need a new website and we have a WordPress, I think this is absolutely a thing that we could do, because again, they're familiar with how to edit everything. We don't even have to teach them anything. You know what I mean? Like we create only the front end. It's still a big task and it's still a huge performance improvement, because again, they're just going to be running straight JS code or whatever framework we choose code, rather than going through the whole templating process of WordPress. And we get to host it wherever we want. To me, it seems like it is something that we should definitely look at in depth and see how well we can integrate it. Like if you can, again, it could be a pass-off system where you create the entire front end with static content, and then we pass it off to someone else to tie in the WordPress API. Pass it off to me, pass it off to someone else. You know what I mean? Like it could be that easy.
Yeah, honestly. Because I mean, I'm like I said, I'm doing the layout now.
Yeah.
And then once that's done, it's kind of like we're off to the races. It's like basically where do we want to go? Because every place for the most part is like custom UI. You could do it. You don't have to use a WordPress template, like a pre-made one. You can make your own or whatever, and then just like kind of go with it from there. And so like, I mean, we don't even need to use a WordPress template. I could just make a thing that isn't a WordPress template and then just have it plug into
WordPress.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think one of the things that we kind of decided at this point too, and I'll like kind of mention this because now because I know you have to take off soon, is one of the things that we kind of decided was like we were kind of like going back and forth, and we found that it was delaying our decision, and so we were like, all right, well, one thing that we know we need to do is figure out the layout, and so as a result of us needing to figure out the layout, regardless, let's just move ahead with that. And that's sort of where I think we're still at, right? Like we're like obviously still making the thing, but like one of the things I think this is like, I think it's important to mention is that people I think would get stuck up on the CMS discussion, but they don't realize that there's work that could be done now. And with this headless thing, if all we decide is headless, we don't even decide what template it is. If we just decide headless, now it's unlocked another section of work, right?
Yep.
And so I think this is kind of an important thing for people who get in a deadlock for decision making is oftentimes there's something that you can do because it needs to be done regardless. Sometimes there's something that you are set in stone against or for, and so you could just kind of jump in and do it. And that's exactly what we're doing is Now we're slowly moving forward. But like if I hadn't started the design, if I hadn't started this, I haven't started that. Now we're so much further behind. Like we're literally like 2 or 3 days behind where we are now, right? The design has to be done.
Yep.
It has to be done. It has to be discussed, no matter what it is. So like therefore we'll just be done. I think that's an important lesson in and of itself. And with this headless CMS thing, that's really interesting because it does really allow us to stick to our guns. Really allows us to just sort of stick with what we know, almost essentially.
Exactly. So I think, like, honestly, with that being said, we got to wrap it up, unfortunately. But I think you hit every nail on the head there, and I think this discussion was extremely valuable, not only for our business and moving forward, but for everyone that's listening, because this is the kind of thing you go through, whether it be on your own or if you have a business partner, whatever, or you have a client. These are the kinds of decisions that you have to make as you're going through, like which method is the right method. Each method that we discussed today is a right method for someone for something. So it's not we're not crapping on any methods out there that people are using, because it can absolutely work in almost any situation. But when you're going from a fresh perspective and you have a choice, like we do right now with HTML, all the things, I think this is the thing that opens up so many options, and it's so hard to narrow it down. Now, have we narrowed it down today? Maybe, like with the headless CMS thing, that might be a huge narrow down for us. We still have to go back.
On the table.
Yeah, it's another option on the table that could potentially work. So we're going to have to go back, look at it, both of us separately, come back to the table and bring it up. But again, like Matt was saying, he's going to be working on something simultaneously. So it's a really good point. Always kind of try to move forward with a project, regardless of what decisions have been made. Whatever you can do that's been set in stone, like we're designing something, so that's set in stone. We're moving forward with that. It's a great step in the right direction for you not to like sit on your butt and do nothing, because that happens really often, is like you just talk about it for weeks and weeks and weeks and you do nothing, whereas that is an extremely counterproductive thing in a web development industry. Again, whether it be for your own project or a client project, everything has to be moving pretty quickly. You'll know, like, when you get to deadline time, it's going to be intensive. So you can't be wasting time as you're going through it. So with that being said, I think this was a really valuable discussion. Let us know what you think on our socials, join our Discord and stuff like that. Let us know what you think.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's time to kind of run the old conclusion here. So thanks for listening, and make sure you don't miss an episode by subscribing on the platform of your choice. You can find us on the socials via @HTML All the Things. That's on Facebook and Instagram. You can also find us on Twitter, which is @HTML Everything. We're on Medium, and we're on GitHub, and we're also on Patreon, which is patreon.com/HTML all the things. Check out the tiers and give that a go. And with that being said, many thanks to our $3 patrons. That's Sean from RabbitWorks JavaScript. You can find him at youtube.com/RabbitWorks JavaScript, and again, that's WERKS. Garrick from Local Path Computing and Web Design. You can find him at localpathcomputing.com. Craig, aka Cosworth, as well as Ryan Gatchell from Blue Black Digital, which is blueblackdigital.com. And with that all being said, feel free to leave a comment or a review on the platform that you are listening to this on, and we are signing off.